You won't believe what happened to me right in my own neighborhood. One moment I thought I was dealing with HOA officials, and the next, I realized I was staring down the barrel of the biggest nightmare of my life. Fake HOA cops showed up at my door, pretending to enforce community rules. But their real plan was much darker. What they didn't know was that I had one lifeline left: my brother, an ex-Marine. And trust me, things took a turn they never saw coming. That day started out like any other in the neighborhood, quiet and almost too normal. I had just finished mowing the front lawn and was ready to head inside when I noticed a black SUV slowly pulling up near my driveway. At first, I didn't think much of it. People visit the neighborhood all the time, and we've all gotten used to the occasional HOA check-in. But the way this SUV lingered, with its tinted windows and engine running a little too quietly, sent a chill down my spine. After a few moments, the doors opened, and two men stepped out wearing dark uniforms. At a glance, they looked official, like they belonged to some enforcement agency. Their outfits had badges sewn onto the sleeves, and one of them carried a clipboard, while the other adjusted something on his belt that looked dangerously close to a holster. They didn't smile, didn't wave, just walked with that kind of stiff authority that made you instinctively stand straighter and question yourself. The taller one approached first, eyes scanning my house like he already owned the place. His voice was firm, no nonsense, and carried a weight of command that immediately set me on edge. He introduced himself as an HOA officer and claimed they were conducting a surprise compliance check. That phrase alone made my heart skip a beat. I'd lived here for years, and not once had the HOA sent armed-looking officers to do a compliance check. Normally, it's just a letter in the mail or a polite email about lawn care or trash bins. Something about this was off, but in the moment I tried to stay calm. I asked politely if they had any paperwork or notice to prove what they were saying. The shorter one smirked, almost like he expected me to ask that question, and he tapped the badge on his chest as if that alone should silence any doubts I had. It wasn't just their appearance that unsettled me. It was their behavior. Instead of walking the property casually, they kept glancing toward each other, giving quick nods and subtle hand signals. They weren't interested in checking paint on the fence or the condition of the yard. They were watching me, assessing me, like predators circling their prey. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself not to show any fear, but the unease was impossible to ignore. Every instinct in me screamed that something was terribly wrong. As they asked me pointed questions about who else lived in the house when I was usually home and whether I had security cameras, I realized this wasn't about HOA compliance at all. No legitimate HOA representative would care about my daily schedule or what kind of locks I had on my doors. My mind started racing, trying to figure out what their real angle was. Still, I forced myself to play along, answering vaguely while scanning for an escape plan if things went south. The taller man began to step closer, closing the gap between us. His presence was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of his stare boring into me. I noticed the SUV door still slightly ajar, like they were leaving themselves a quick exit, or maybe planning to force me inside. That thought alone sent a surge of adrenaline through my veins. My palms grew clammy, and I discreetly glanced toward my phone on the porch railing, wondering if I could grab it without drawing too much attention. They continued their act, asking to step inside my home under the pretense of checking for interior compliance violations. That was the final red flag. The HOA had no authority to enter anyone's house without permission, and the way they said it wasn't a request. It was a demand disguised as politeness. My stomach twisted into knots, and every fiber of my being told me to stall, to buy myself time. I tried to shift the conversation, asking them again for official documentation, but this time their expressions hardened. The smirk vanished from the shorter man's face, and the taller one's jaw tightened. The air between us grew heavy, almost suffocating, as though they knew I was on to them. I could sense the tension building with each passing second, the kind of tension that warned me something bad was about to happen if I didn't find a way out. As the minutes ticked by, the uneasiness gnawed at me, and those little details I had brushed off at first started to scream louder in my head. The badges on their uniforms weren't quite right. Too shiny, almost like they'd just been ordered online. The lettering on their patches didn't match the actual HOA logo I'd seen 100 times before. Even their so-called identification cards, which they flashed quickly like a magician's trick, had no barcodes, no signatures, nothing official at all. It was like they thought if they moved fast enough, I wouldn't notice the imperfections. But I did. Then came the way they talked. Every time I asked a question, they dodged around it, offering vague explanations that sounded rehearsed, as if they had practiced a script but didn't quite have it down. They kept repeating phrases like, in accordance with HOA compliance standards, without ever specifying what those standards were. The more they spoke, the more it felt like they weren't there to check anything at all. They were there to control the conversation and keep me off balance. I couldn't shake the way their eyes darted constantly, scanning the street, the windows, even the corners of my yard, as though they were worried someone might be watching. The taller one especially seemed on edge, his hand brushing near his hip every few moments, like he wanted me to notice whatever was tucked there. I forced myself not to stare too long, but I caught enough of a glimpse to know it wasn't just some harmless tool. The realization hit me like a punch. These men weren't HOA officers. They were imposters, and if they were armed, the danger was far worse than I had imagined. Trying to buy myself more time, I asked them if we could reschedule their inspection, maybe set an appointment when my schedule was freer. The shorter man leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice in a way that was meant to intimidate. He said something about non-compliance leading to immediate fines, maybe even legal trouble. The way he said legal trouble felt like a threat, not a warning. My chest tightened, and I tried to keep my face neutral while my mind screamed at me to stay calm. Just then, a neighbor drove past slowly, and I noticed how both men shifted their posture instantly, forcing fake smiles and a casual stance until the car disappeared around the corner. That was it, the moment I knew without a doubt that they were hiding something. No real HOA officials would need to play pretend the second someone else came into view. As soon as the street grew quiet again, their tones changed. The taller one stepped closer, narrowing his eyes as if daring me to question him again. He asked if I lived alone, his voice steady but laced with something darker underneath. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully answered with as little detail as possible. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, every sound amplified, every instinct on high alert. Inside my head, a checklist formed rapidly. I had no solid proof to stop them, no immediate way to call for help without them noticing. My phone was still just a few feet away, but reaching for it now could tip them off that I was planning something. I needed to stall, to keep them talking, to figure out what their endgame was before they made their move. So I asked questions back, pretending to be cooperative while quietly testing their knowledge. Which HOA board member authorized this inspection? I asked. The taller one blinked, caught off guard, then mumbled a name I'd never heard before. When I pressed further, he snapped, saying it was classified information. That word alone, classified, set off every alarm bell in my head. The HOA doesn't deal in classified anything. I could see it in their faces now, the cracks in their act widening with every exchange. Their confidence wavered, and their eyes hardened, as though they were deciding whether to keep up the charade or drop it altogether. My gut told me the moment of truth was coming, and I wasn't sure which direction it would go. Every instinct screamed at me that something terrible was about to unfold, and I knew I had to be ready for whatever came next. The shift from uneasy conversation to outright terror happened faster than I could process. One moment, the taller man was standing with that false air of authority, and the next, his hand was on my arm, firm and unyielding. The grip wasn't casual, it was a warning. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't about fines or rules anymore. The pretense of an HOA inspection had vanished, and in its place was something much more sinister. The shorter man stepped in close on the other side, his eyes darting around before settling on me with a look that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of look that told me they had already decided what was going to happen, and I was just along for the ride. I tried to pull my arm back, forcing a nervous laugh, pretending I didn't understand the seriousness of the situation, but his grip tightened like a vice. The shorter man leaned in, his voice low and sharp, whispering that we should take this conversation somewhere more private. My heart raced, thudding against my chest so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I felt trapped between them, the SUV behind me like a dark maw waiting to swallow me whole. They started steering me toward the driveway, each step making the reality clearer. This wasn't an inspection. This was an abduction. My mind raced through every possible escape route, but my legs felt like lead, and my throat had gone dry. I thought about shouting, but what if no one heard me? Worse, what if they silenced me before I could even make a sound? The taller man's hand pressed against my back now, subtle enough that if anyone looked, it might not seem threatening, but heavy enough to keep me moving exactly where he wanted me. The SUV loomed closer with every step, its back door cracked open just enough to reveal the shadowy interior. The image of myself being shoved inside, disappearing without a trace, flashed through my mind and nearly made my knees buckle. I forced myself to breathe, to think, to find some way to stall them before that door closed behind me. I muttered that I needed to grab some paperwork from inside the house to verify their visit, hoping it would throw them off. The shorter man chuckled under his breath, shaking his head like he was humoring a child. "No need for that," he said, his hand brushing against something under his jacket that I didn't dare identify. Every second felt like an eternity, my body screaming at me to fight, to resist, to do anything other than let myself be pushed into that vehicle. But I also knew that any sudden move could provoke them, and I wasn't sure how far they were willing to go. The air was thick, suffocating, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back despite the cool breeze outside. I caught sight of my neighbor's house across the street, blinds slightly open, but no sign of movement inside. The street was empty, eerily quiet, like the world had gone on pause just for this nightmare to play out. As the SUV door opened wider, the taller man leaned close, his breath hot against my ear as he muttered that things would go easier if I didn't resist. That was the breaking point. The realization that they had no intention of letting me walk away freely hit me like a tidal wave. Panic surged through me, but beneath it was a spark of defiance. I wasn't going to let them drag me away without a fight. I shifted my weight slightly, testing their grip, calculating if I had a chance to break free and make a run for it. The shorter man's eyes locked onto mine, almost daring me to try, a smug grin spreading across his face as if he could already see the outcome. I forced myself to keep breathing, to stay just calm enough to think clearly. My phone was still on the porch, only a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. My best chance was to keep stalling, to look for any opening, any distraction that could tip the balance in my favor. The taller man gave me a slight shove, guiding me closer to the SUV, his grip unrelenting. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I could feel the walls of my world closing in, the line between safety and disaster growing thinner by the second. "Do you want me to continue with keynote number 4 in the same way? 700 words, suspenseful, no headings, no ending sentences?" With every forced step toward that SUV, the reality of what was happening pressed down heavier on my chest, and I knew I had to act fast or risk never being seen again. My mind was screaming at me to find a way out, and that's when it hit me, my brother. The thought of him was like a sudden beam of light cutting through the darkness. He wasn't just family, he was an ex-Marine, a man trained for situations exactly like this. If anyone could turn the tide, it was him. The problem was getting to him before these men could silence me completely. I tried to sound casual, even though my voice trembled, and said I needed to step inside to grab some documents. The taller one squeezed my arm tighter, his eyes narrowing, clearly not convinced. The shorter one smirked, shaking his head, and muttered that they didn't have time for games. I felt my throat tighten, but I pushed forward anyway, telling them my brother would want to see the paperwork too since he was staying with me. The moment the words left my mouth, I saw a flicker of hesitation in their eyes. The mention of my brother had shifted something, like they hadn't expected anyone else to be around. Seizing the moment, I told them I just needed a second to call him out. My heart raced as I slowly reached toward the porch, inching closer to my phone without making it obvious. The taller man's gaze followed my hand, suspicion etched into his face, but before he could object, I managed to grab it. With shaking fingers, I hit the speed dial. Each ring on the line felt like an eternity, the tension growing so thick I could hardly breathe. Finally, his voice answered, steady and calm like it always was. I forced myself to sound composed, but my words came out clipped, rushed, barely above a whisper. I told him to come outside immediately, that it was urgent. I could see the two men exchange a quick glance, their act of control beginning to crack. The shorter one's jaw tightened, and he muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch. The taller one shifted his stance, his grip loosening just slightly, enough for me to take a small step back. My pulse pounded as I heard the sound of the front door creaking open behind me. Relief and fear clashed inside me all at once. My brother stepped out, calm and composed, his eyes narrowing instantly as he took in the sight before him. Even without a word, the air shifted. The men straightened their posture, but their bravado faltered. My brother's presence was different. Solid, commanding, and dangerous in a way they hadn't anticipated. He didn't need a uniform or a badge. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had been through more than they could ever imagine. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He just walked forward with that deliberate calmness that made even the taller one take a step back. I could feel the weight of the situation shift as my brother positioned himself between me and them, his gaze sharp and unwavering. The shorter man tried to recover, clearing his throat and insisting they were there on official HOA business. But his words faltered under my brother's steady stare. He asked for their identification in a tone that left no room for argument, and when they fumbled to produce the flimsy cards they had shown me earlier, I saw the flicker of doubt flash across their faces again. My brother didn't even look down at the IDs for long before shaking his head slightly, his jaw set like stone. His voice was calm but edged with steel as he told them their story didn't add up. The men shifted uneasily, and for the first time since they arrived, I saw the cracks in their confidence widen. The taller one glanced toward the SUV, like he was calculating an escape, while the shorter one clenched his fists at his sides, torn between holding his ground and backing down. The air between them was electric, charged with the possibility of an eruption at any second. I stood frozen, every muscle in my body coiled tight, watching the silent standoff unfold. My brother didn't move an inch, didn't break eye contact. His calm presence a shield that pushed back against their intimidation. I could see it working, see the doubt growing in their eyes, but I also knew we weren't out of danger yet. They weren't ready to walk away. Not yet. And the tension stretched thinner with every passing heartbeat. The silence between them stretched so long it felt like the whole neighborhood had gone still, like even the wind was holding its breath. My brother stood firmly in front of me, his stance calm but unyielding, and I could sense the shift in control the moment he squared his shoulders. The fake HOA cops hadn't expected him, and that fact alone rattled them more than they wanted to show. The taller one adjusted his jacket nervously, trying to mask it as a casual move, but his hand lingered just a little too close to his hip. My brother's eyes locked on that motion instantly, sharp as a blade, and I could see the way his entire body shifted subtly, prepared for anything. The shorter one tried to recover the narrative, plastering on a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. He cleared his throat and insisted again that they were conducting official HOA business, his tone a bit louder now, as if volume could make his story sound more believable. My brother didn't flinch. He calmly asked again which board member had authorized this visit, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone that made you realize you couldn't bluff your way past it. They hesitated, exchanging a quick glance, and in that tiny pause, I could tell they were scrambling. My brother stepped closer, closing the space between him and the taller man, and the change was immediate. The fake officer took a half step back, the bravado on his face slipping just enough for me to see the unease underneath. He tried to recover, standing taller, but the edge of authority he had walked in with was gone. My brother wasn't raising his voice or making threats. He didn't have to. Everything about the way he carried himself screamed experience, control, and danger for anyone foolish enough to cross him. The shorter man's smirk faded as he realized they were losing the upper hand. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes flicking toward the SUV like he was silently signaling to the other one. My stomach twisted at the thought they might still try something desperate, but my brother didn't give them the chance. He told them flatly that if they were truly HOA officials, they wouldn't mind him calling the local police to verify their credentials. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Neither of them answered right away, and that silence told me more than any denial could. Finally, the taller one spoke, his voice low and strained, insisting that wasn't necessary, that the matter could be resolved privately. My brother tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing, and asked why two supposed HOA officers conducting a routine check would be afraid of police verification. The question landed like a direct hit. The shorter one's jaw clenched, his face tightening as if he was holding back a curse. He muttered something about us being difficult, and that this would have consequences. My brother didn't even blink. He simply took one step closer, his voice calm as he told them the only consequence they should be worried about was lying to a federal veteran on his own property. The taller man's eyes darted toward me briefly, then back to my brother, calculating, measuring, trying to decide if they could still salvage their plan or if they had already lost. I could feel the tension coil tighter around us, like a storm about to break. My brother stood tall, shoulders squared, gaze locked on them, daring them to make a move. He wasn't bluffing, and they knew it. The air felt charged, heavy, every second stretching out as if time itself was slowing down. I noticed the shorter one's hands twitch slightly, his fingers flexing, the kind of movement that betrayed nerves despite his effort to look composed. The taller man shifted again, the faintest hint of sweat glistening at his temple despite the cool air. My brother saw all of it, every tiny detail, and I could tell he was ready to act if they so much as twitched in the wrong direction. He didn't need to raise his voice or show aggression. His presence alone was enough to make them hesitate. Still, the danger hadn't passed. They weren't walking away, not yet. The SUV sat there, its engine still humming softly, like a predator waiting for the chance to pounce. The men kept glancing at it, as if it were their safety net, their escape plan, their last card to play. My brother noticed too, his stance shifting ever so slightly to position himself more solidly between me and the vehicle. He wasn't just protecting me. He was blocking their exit, making sure they knew there was no easy way out without going through him. The tension grew unbearable, a silent standoff where every breath, every flicker of movement carried weight. My brother's calm voice broke through the heavy air again, telling them they had one chance to explain themselves before he called in authorities who wouldn't be as patient as he was. The look on their faces told me they understood the threat wasn't empty. They were cornered, and the facade they had built so carefully was beginning to crack under the pressure of a man who wasn't going to back down. The silence was deafening, like the whole world had gone still, waiting to see who would make the next move. The taller man's eyes darted between my brother and the SUV, his posture betraying the panic he was trying so hard to mask. The shorter one had lost the smugness he wore earlier, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes hard and calculating as though he was running through escape routes in his head. I could feel the shift in the air, the moment when the facade completely unraveled, and they realized they weren't in control anymore. My brother didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't give them an inch of space to regain their footing. His voice cut through the heavy air, low and steady, reminding them once again that real HOA officials don't show up armed, don't refuse verification, and don't try to corner residents into SUVs. The taller one opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words seemed to die in his throat, replaced by the quick, nervous glance he shot toward the car as though willing it to somehow save him. I stood frozen behind my brother, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I watched the cracks in their confidence widen, the masks slipping further with each second they failed to come up with a believable lie. The shorter one finally tried, forcing his voice to sound calm as he claimed this was all a misunderstanding, that they had the wrong address, that maybe they were supposed to be in a different neighborhood. The excuse sounded hollow, desperate, and even he seemed to know how ridiculous it was the moment the words left his mouth. My brother tilted his head slightly, studying them with an intensity that made the shorter one visibly swallow. The taller one tried to back up slowly, inching toward the SUV, but my brother shifted just enough to block his path, his presence filling the space with silent authority. He didn't threaten them, didn't raise his voice, but everything about his stance screamed that if they tried anything, they wouldn't make it far. The taller man's hands twitched slightly at his sides, his breathing shallow, sweat glistening at his temple. The street around us remained eerily quiet, no neighbors stepping out, no cars driving past, just the four of us locked in a standoff that felt like it had no end. I could see the panic starting to bloom behind their eyes, the realization that whatever plan they had walked in with had completely fallen apart. They had expected an easy mark, someone they could scare and control, but instead they found themselves cornered by someone they hadn't anticipated, someone who wasn't afraid to stare them down and call their bluff. The shorter one finally snapped, muttering under his breath that this wasn't worth it, that they needed to go. The taller one hesitated, his pride warring with his fear, his eyes narrowing as he weighed whether to push back or cut their losses. My brother didn't move, didn't even blink, just kept his gaze locked on them like a predator watching prey that had run out of options. After a long, tense moment, the taller one finally exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping ever so slightly as though admitting defeat without saying the words. They backed toward the SUV slowly, their movements jerky and uncertain now, a far cry from the confident stride they had shown when they first arrived. The shorter one muttered something about this not being over, his voice strained, more like a hollow threat than a promise. My brother didn't answer, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He just stood his ground, watching as they climbed back into the vehicle, their faces tight with frustration and fear. The SUV's engine revved louder, the sound cutting through the heavy silence as they pulled away, their departure as unceremonious as their arrival had been calculated. I stayed rooted in place, my body trembling, my breath finally breaking free in uneven bursts as the vehicle disappeared down the street. My brother remained steady, his eyes still fixed on the road long after they were gone, making sure they didn't circle back, making sure the danger had truly passed. The tension lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, the echo of what had almost happened pressing down on me with the weight of realization that I had been seconds away from vanishing into that SUV. 2.